The sand on Chiron 4 didn't crunch like proper sand should. It whispered, a sound like static between radio frequencies, like the universe clearing its throat. Commander Darian Cross had been hearing it for 6 hours now, ever since the plasma strike had turned his convoy into abstract art and scattered his squad across 15 clicks of rust-colored wasteland. His left arm hung useless. The exosuit's servo motors fused into expensive dead weight. The twin suns, one pale yellow, one sickly orange, had spent the afternoon taking turns trying to cook him inside his armor. He'd stopped checking his tactical display an hour ago. The constant signal loss notifications were more depressing than helpful. The temple appeared like a hallucination, which honestly wouldn't have surprised him. Ancient stone the color of dried blood emerged from a dune, angular architecture that predated human presence on this rock by millennia. Possibly predated the ascendancy too, though nobody had bothered asking the locals before both sides started using their planet as a shooting gallery. The locals wisely had evacuated to the southern continent and were presumably watching the war on television while eating whatever passed for popcorn in their culture. Darian half walked, half fell down the stone steps into blessed shadow. The temperature dropped 20 degrees immediately. The air tasted different here, less copper, more like ozone, and something organic he couldn't place. His helmet's atmospheric scanner flickered uselessly. Everything was flickering uselessly today. He didn't see her at first. The pillar she'd chosen was set back in an alcove, and she'd positioned herself to be nearly invisible from the entrance. Professional work. He only noticed because his boot hit something metallic, a piece of ascendancy armor, the kind with the distinctive hexagonal plating that refracted light in unsettling ways. Then he saw the blood. It pooled dark against darker stone, and his eyes followed the trail up to where she sat, back against the pillar, one hand pressed to her side. Her armor was shattered there, the bio-responsive plating that usually sealed automatically, hanging in useless fragments. The wound beneath was cauterized but still weeping plasma burn. Someone had hit her with military-grade ordnance at close range. She was watching him, had probably been watching since he'd started his graceless descent into the temple. Darian's hand went to his sidearm, then stopped. She wasn't moving. Couldn't move much from the look of things. Her other hand rested near her hip where a weapon should be, but the holster was empty. They stared at each other across 10 meters of ancient stone. Two soldiers from opposite sides of a war, neither of them was currently winning. She looked human. That was always the disturbing part. The Ascendancy soldiers could have been human. Same basic build, same arrangement of features, except for details that crawled up your spine when you noticed them. Her skin was pale enough to catch the dim light filtering through cracks in the ceiling, making her seem almost luminescent. Hair black as the gaps between stars fell across her face in sweat-matted tangles, and those ears rising to elegant points through her hair, the feature that marked her as definitely, absolutely not from Earth. "Well," Darian said, his voice cracking from dehydration, "this is awkward." Her eyes, violet, he realized, actually violet like someone had crushed amethysts and used them for irises, narrowed slightly. Calculating, running threat assessments. He knew the look because he was doing the same thing. "Your armor is damaged," she said. Perfect English. No accent. That was unsettling too. "Left arm and primary power distribution. You're carrying approximately 15 kilograms of dead weight." "Yeah, well, you've got a hole in you the size of a fist, so let's call it even." The corner of her mouth twitched. It might have been pain. It might have been something like amusement. Outside, something screamed across the sky. A reconnaissance drone, probably. The sound Dopplered away into nothing. They both tensed, listening, but it didn't circle back. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Darian made a decision that probably violated about 40 different military protocols. He unsealed his helmet, the hiss of equalizing pressure loud in the confined space, and pulled it off. The air smelled ancient, dusty, and faintly sweet. He dropped the helmet and raised his functional hand, palm out. "I need to rest. You need to rest. We're both having a terrible day. How about we don't make it worse?" She studied him for a long moment. He could see her weighing options, running scenarios. Finally, she moved her hand away from the empty holster, Just a few centimeters, but enough. A gesture. 15 minutes, she said. Then you leave. Deal. He moved slowly, deliberately, crossing to the opposite wall and sliding down it with a groan his pride would have preferred to suppress. His medical kit was still intact on his belt. Small mercies. From this angle, he could see her wound more clearly. Plasma burns were nasty. They kept burning even after the initial hit, the energy cascading through tissue until something stopped it. Usually bone, sometimes not even then. She was watching him again, head tilted slightly, those pointed ears catching every sound. He wondered if her hearing was enhanced. Probably. Everything else about Ascendancy soldiers seemed to be. That needs treatment, he said, nodding toward her side. You're going to go septic in this environment. The atmospheric bacteria here don't care whose side you're on. I'm aware of basic field medicine, human. Darian, since we're temporarily not killing each other, you can use my name. Another pause. Siralith. Siralith. He tested the word, the syllables feeling strange on his tongue. That wound is going to kill you in about 8 hours. I've got a medical kit. I've got working hands. Well, hand. Let me help. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. Why would you help me? Because dying slowly from infection is a terrible way to go, and I've already seen enough terrible things today. He pulled the medical kit from his belt, held it up. Plus, my mother raised me to be helpful. She'd be very disappointed if I let someone die when I had the supplies to prevent it. Your mother raised a fool. Yeah, she mentions that in her messages. He started to rise. I'm going to come over there now, slowly. If you want to kill me with your bare hands, you're welcome to try. But honestly, I think we're both too tired for that kind of drama. Siralith's eyes tracked him as he approached, violet irises catching the light. He could see her jaw set, muscles tensing despite the obvious pain. She was deciding whether to trust him or try to snap his neck. He really hoped it was the former. His neck had grown fond of being unsnapped. He knelt beside her, moving with exaggerated care, and opened the medical kit. The smell of antiseptic cut through the dusty air. Her armor was in the way, the damaged plating still partially covering the wound. I need to remove this, he said, gesturing to the armor fragments. She reached up with her free hand, the movement precise despite her condition, and pressed something at her collar. The armor made a sound like a sigh and loosened, the bio-responsive material recognizing a shutdown command. Darian helped pull the pieces away, trying not to notice how close this forced them to be, trying to focus on the clinical aspects of field medicine, and not on the fact that he was undressing an enemy soldier in an ancient temple, while both their armies hunted the wasteland outside. The wound beneath was worse than he'd thought. The plasma had burned through the armor, through her uniform, into flesh and possibly deeper. But something was wrong with the burn pattern. It was healing at the edges, not fast, but faster than any human wound should. The flesh was knitting itself together in real time, fighting the damage even as the plasma residue tried to spread. You're resonant, class, he said quietly, the realization settling cold in his stomach. The Ascendancy's elite, genetically engineered, enhanced in ways that made regular soldiers look like children playing dress-up. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw acknowledgement, warning, challenge. Careful, human, she said, her voice low and edged with something between threat and amusement. I'm not just any woman. Darian looked at the medical kit, at the wound, at those violet eyes that held depths he couldn't read. His hand was already reaching for the antiseptic applicator. Yeah, he said, applying the first seal to the wound's edge, watching her flinch but not pull away. I'm starting to get that impression. The antiseptic made a sound like angry bees when it hit the plasma residue. Siralith's breath hissed between her teeth, but she didn't pull away. Darian had to give her credit. He'd seen grown men scream from wounds half this size. The gel turned from blue to purple as it neutralized the cascading energy. Tiny molecular machines working to stop the burn from spreading deeper. This is going to take a while, he said, applying another layer. The plasma gets into the tissue and just keeps burning. It's a design feature, not a bug. I'm familiar with human weaponry. Her voice was tight with controlled pain. I've been on the receiving end before. Yeah? How many times have you let a human patch you up after? This would be the first. Lucky me. He worked in silence for a moment, the gel doing its job with methodical efficiency. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the temple groan like an old ship. Sand whispered against stone in that weird static sound that made him think of ghosts talking on dead radio channels. His hands were shaking, not from fear. He'd burned through his adrenaline reserves hours ago, but from the crash that came after. The body's way of sending a very pointed message about sustainability and maybe taking a break from getting shot at for a while. The applicator slipped, gel dripping onto her uniform instead of the wound. "Steady, human," Sorales said, but there was something different in her tone. Less sharp, almost concerned, which seemed absurd given the circumstances. "Sorry, it's been a long day." He tried again, more carefully this time. "Started with breakfast that claimed to be eggs but was probably made from recycled packaging materials. Went downhill from there. Your military rations are insulting. You've tried them?" "Once, during a forward observation mission. I wanted to understand what sustained human soldiers in the field." She paused, watching his hands work. "I concluded that humans must possess remarkable digestive fortitude to process such material without immediate system failure." Darian laughed. Actually laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Yeah, well, the trick is not thinking about it too hard. Just put it in your mouth and swallow before your brain realizes what you're doing. That seems like poor survival strategy. Welcome to military logistics, where everything is terrible and the nutritional content is a polite fiction." He finished sealing the main wound and sat back, checking his work. The gel had formed a bioactive seal, glowing faintly in the dim light. Her enhanced healing was already working with it, the flesh beneath knitting faster than should be possible. "You're going to need to stay still for at least 6 hours while this sets. Any strenuous movement and you'll tear it open again." Sorales looked at the sealed wound, then at him. 6 hours. Minimum. 12 would be better, but I'm guessing we don't have 12 hours. A sound from outside cut through their conversation, distant but distinct. Engines. Multiple vehicles moving in a search pattern across the wasteland. They both froze, listening. The sound grew louder, peaked, then faded as the patrol moved past their position. "They're looking for survivors," Darian said quietly. "They're looking for me." Something in how she said it made him look at her more carefully. Not just military confidence. Something else. Something that tasted like resignation and a kind of weary knowledge. "You want to explain that?" "Not particularly." "Fair enough." He started repacking his medical kit, movements automatic from years of field training. His arm still hung useless in its damaged sleeve, the exosuit's weight starting to make his shoulder ache. "But if both sides are actively searching this area, we've got maybe another day before someone gets thorough enough to check ancient ruins. This place is obvious shelter." "I know." She shifted against the pillar, testing the wound's limits with small movements. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't make a sound. "They won't stop searching, not until they find me or confirm my death." "What did you do? Assassinate someone important?" Her eyes met his, and in them he saw something complex. Regret, maybe. Defiance. "I failed to assassinate someone important. That's considerably worse." Before he could respond to that particular bombshell, her head turned sharply toward the temple entrance. Those pointed ears had caught something his merely human hearing couldn't detect yet. "Drone," she said. "Electromagnetic signature. Ascendancy model. 30 seconds. "How can you—" He stopped. Right. Enhanced. Of course she could sense things he couldn't. He pressed back against the pillar, making himself small, wishing his armor's active camouflage still worked. Wishing a lot of things, really. The drone's hum became audible to him about 10 seconds later, a high-pitched whine that set his teeth on edge. It passed over the temple entrance, paused, then continued on. They waited in silence, counting heartbeats. The sound faded. "Reconnaissance pattern," Sorales said after a moment. "They'll sweep the area in expanding grids. We have perhaps 3 hours before they return with ground units." "Fantastic." Darian leaned his head back against the pillar, staring at the ancient ceiling with its carved symbols that neither human nor ascendancy scholars had managed to fully translate. "So we're trapped in a dusty tomb. Both sides want us dead or captured, and we have maybe 3 hours to figure out a plan. This day just keeps getting better." "You could leave," she said, and there was something odd in her voice. Testing, maybe, or genuine. Head north. The human lines are approximately 18 kilometers that direction. You might make it before the search intensifies. Might? That's a word that fills me with confidence. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way she held herself despite the pain. The alertness in those violet eyes even after blood loss and trauma. The fact that she was suggesting he abandon her when she couldn't move without tearing her wound open. You know what the problem with your plan is? Enlighten me. I'd be leaving someone behind who needs medical supervision, and my mother really would kill me if I did that. She takes the Hippocratic Oath thing very seriously, even for soldiers. Your mother is a physician? Was. Before the war. Now she runs a trauma center on Europa Station, which is basically the same thing, but with more screaming and improvised surgical techniques. He pulled a ration bar from his belt, looked at it with deep suspicion, then broke it in half and offered part to Siralith. Here, if we're going to die together in the next few hours, might as well die with full stomachs. She took the offered bar, examined it with an expression of profound skepticism. What is this allegedly? Protein matrix with synthesized nutrients, or cardboard mixed with optimism. The packaging is deliberately vague. She took a cautious bite, chewed slowly, and her face went through a fascinating series of expressions. This is remarkable. Yeah? In that it manages to taste like nothing and everything unpleasant simultaneously. A culinary achievement in negative space. Darian laughed again, the sound echoing in the ancient space. See? Now you're getting the full human military experience. Terrible food, constant danger, and questionable life choices. And humor in inappropriate moments. Especially that. It's either laugh or cry, and crying uses water we need for staying alive. He took a bite of his own ration bar, winced, and forced himself to swallow. So, you failed to assassinate someone. Want to tell me who, or should I guess wildly and probably insult someone's mother in the process? Siralith was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes distant. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured. I was designed for infiltration, for ending problems that couldn't be solved through conventional warfare. The Council of Spheres created me for a specific purpose. Created, not born. There's a difference? Philosophically speaking, probably not. Practically speaking, it means someone decided what you'd be good at before you had a say in the matter. He knew he should shut up, stop asking questions, maintain operational security. But they were trapped in a tomb with limited time and even more limited options. And something about her, the way she'd warned him, she wasn't just any woman, the dark humor in her voice, made him curious. So what happened? You decide you didn't like the assignment? Her hand moved to her side, fingers brushing the sealed wound without quite touching it. I decided that individual lives matter more than strategic objectives. My creators did not agree with this assessment. Yeah, that sounds about right for command structures everywhere. He finished his ration bar, grimaced, and immediately regretted every bite. So now they're hunting you, your own people. They're not my people. They're my owners. There's a difference. The wind picked up outside, carrying sand against stone in that strange static whisper. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Actual thunder, which meant the seasonal storms were moving in. That would complicate the search patterns, might give them more time, or trap them here longer. Darian closed his eyes, feeling exhaustion pull at him like gravity. His shoulder ached where the dead exosuit dragged at it. His throat felt like sandpaper, and he was having a philosophical conversation with an enemy soldier, an engineered assassin apparently, about autonomy and choice while both their armies tried to kill them. You know what? He said to the ancient ceiling. This is officially the weirdest day I've ever had, and I once spent 3 hours in the escape pod with a malfunctioning waste recycler, so that's saying something. Siralith made a sound that might have been a laugh. Welcome to my life, human. Darian. Darian, she corrected, and something in how she said his name, carefully, deliberately, made him open his eyes and look at her. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition of something shared. Outside, another drone passed over. They waited in silence for it to fade. 6 hours, Darian said eventually. That's how long you need to heal enough to move. So we've got 6 hours to figure out how to not die. Any suggestions? Prayer? To which gods? The old ones who built this place? Or the new ones who are trying to blow it up? Perhaps both. We need all the help we can acquire. He couldn't argue with that logic. The temperature dropped 20 degrees when the sun set, which happened with the kind of dramatic finality that made Darian miss Earth's leisurely twilights. One moment there was rust-colored light filtering through the temple cracks. The next there was darkness so complete it felt physical. His armor's night vision was burned out along with everything else useful, so he fumbled with a chemical light stick from his kit, cracking it and shaking until it produced a weak green glow. Seralith's eyes reflected the light like a cat's. That was new information he filed away under unsettling biological enhancements. Your pupils are bioluminescent, he said. Useful for navigation in low-light environments. Also deeply creepy in the moment. No offense. None taken. Your species' reliance on artificial light sources is equally peculiar from my perspective. They'd been stuck together for 8 hours now. The search patterns outside had intensified around hour 6, then suddenly pulled back as the storms rolled in. Chiron IV's seasonal electrical tempests were legendary, lightning that could arc for kilometers, static discharge that scrambled every sensor within range. Both armies had apparently decided that discretion was the better part of not getting electrocuted and retreated to hardened positions, which meant Darian and Seralith had the wasteland to themselves until the weather cleared. Could be hours, could be days. So, Darian said, settling against his pillar, with his working arm wrapped around his knees, since we're apparently hosting an extended sleepover in ancient ruins, want to play a game? Seralith shifted slightly, testing her wound. The bioactive seal was holding, but he could see the tightness around her eyes that meant pain was a constant companion. What kind of game? Ever heard of poker? No. Perfect. I'll teach you. We'll use these. He gathered small stones from the temple floor, sorting them into piles by size. Different stones are different values. The goal is to make combinations that beat your opponent's combinations, but you can't see their stones, so you have to deduce what they might have based on their behavior. This sounds needlessly complex. That's because it is, but it passes time, and it's better than sitting in the dark counting the ways we might die. He started explaining the rules using hand gestures and probably butchering the finer points of game theory, but Seralith followed with an intensity that suggested she was analyzing the statistical probabilities in real time. They played 3 hands before she completely destroyed him. You're counting cards, and he accused. I'm observing patterns. That's different. It's really not. Perhaps you're simply bad at poker, Darian. I'm excellent at poker when playing against normal humans who can't calculate odds in their heads like some kind of walking computer. He tossed his stones back into the pile. New game, 20 questions. I ask you something, you ask me something. We take turns. What if I don't want to answer? Then you say pass and we move on. The goal is to learn things, not interrogate each other. He held up his functional hand. I'll start. Why'd you really fail your mission? Seralith was quiet for a long moment, her glowing eyes distant in the chemical light. Thunder rolled outside close enough to make the temple stones vibrate. I was assigned to eliminate a human diplomat, someone working on peace negotiations between our sides. The council believed that removing him would collapse the talks and force humanity to accept their terms through continued conflict. But you didn't do it. I got close enough to touch him, actually. I was posing as a server at a diplomatic function on Kepler Station. I had the weapon. I had the moment. Her hand moved unconsciously to her side again, and then I heard him talking to his daughter over a comlink, telling her he'd be home soon, promising to take her to see the ice glaciers on Titan, making the kind of promises parents make. You have a thing about parents, huh? I have a thing about children who deserve to have parents. The council designed me to be efficient, to see targets as abstractions. But I could hear her voice, his daughter. She was 6 years old and excited about glaciers. Seralith looked at him directly. So I walked away, failed my mission, became a liability that needed termination. Darian sat with that for a moment. Outside, lightning turned the world white for a fraction of a second, and the thunder that followed felt like the planet splitting in half. Your turn. Ask me something. Why did you join the military? Pass. That's not fair. I answered yours. Yeah, well, turnabout and all that. He shifted, trying to find a position where the dead exosuit didn't dig into his shoulder. Fine. I joined because my home colony needed the signing bonus to repair our atmospheric processors. Very heroic, very noble. All about the money keeping people breathing. At least you're honest about it. Lying takes energy I don't have right now. He picked up another stone, turned it over in his hand. The surface was smooth, worn by time and wind. My turn. These enhancements of yours. Can you actually sense electromagnetic fields? Or were you guessing about that drone earlier? I can sense them. Neural implants linked to my sensory cortex. I experience electromagnetic radiation as a kind of pressure, like how you might feel temperature changes. She tilted her head, those pointed ears catching the sound of distant thunder. It's useful tactically, also makes being near active power sources incredibly unpleasant. So you're basically walking around with a permanent headache near any technology? I've adapted. You adapt to sensory input that's constant. That sounds miserable. Your turn to ask something. Saralith considered him with those unsettling reflective eyes. Why did you help me? The truth, not the deflection about your mother. That was the truth. She really would be disappointed. He paused. But also, I guess I'm tired. Tired of the war, tired of the killing, tired of treating people as abstractions. You needed help. I could provide help. Everything else felt like complications that didn't matter in the moment. Simple. The best reasons usually are. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. The lightning was constant now, turning the darkness into a strobe effect. The thunder was loud enough that conversation became difficult anyway. Darian pulled out his last ration bar, looked at it with deep mistrust, then split it again. Saralith took her half without comment this time. They ate in companionable misery. These are truly awful, she said after swallowing. Yeah, welcome to humanity. We conquer star systems but can't figure out decent field rations. Perhaps that should be your species' priority. Fix the food situation, then attempt galactic diplomacy. I'll bring it up at the next strategy meeting, right after I explain why I gave medical aid to an enemy assassin in ancient ruins during an electrical storm. They'll understand, surely. Oh, absolutely. My commanding officer is known for his flexibility and understanding nature. Darian finished his portion, grimaced, and wished desperately for water. His canteen was down to dregs. Actually, he'd probably shoot me on sight and then court-martial whatever was left. Your military structure seems inefficient. You should see our requisition forms. Bureaucracy that would make the ancient gods weep. Another massive lightning strike, this one close enough that the temple was bathed in electric blue light for 3 full seconds. In that moment, Darian saw the carvings on the walls clearly. Alien script that spiraled in patterns that hurt to follow, geometric shapes that seemed to shift when you looked directly at them. When darkness returned, after images danced in his vision. The beings who built this place, Saralith said quietly, they were here before either of our species reached the stars. The Council's archaeologists have theories, but no certainties. Great. We're sheltering in a mystery that nobody understands. That's not ominous at all. Would you prefer a well-documented structure with clear historical context? I'd prefer a nice hotel with working showers and room service, but we don't always get what we want. She made that sound again, not quite a laugh, but close. He was starting to recognize it. The storm continued its assault on the world outside, and inside the temple, 2 soldiers from opposing sides shared stones and stories, and terrible food in the green glow of chemical light. Your turn for a question, Darian said eventually. Do you think the war will end? Pass, Darian. I said pass. That's allowed under the rules I just made up. You're avoiding. I'm being honest about not wanting to think about it. He looked at her across the small space between them. If I think about the war ending, I have to think about what comes after. What do people like us do when the shooting stops? We're not exactly trained for peacetime occupations. People like us, she repeated. You're including me in that category. You said it yourself. You're a weapon who decided not to be used. I'm a soldier who's forgotten why he signed up in the first place. We've got more in common than our respective command structures would like to admit. Sarilith was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it. The neural implants. They're not just sensors, they're tracking devices. The Council can locate any resident through them within a certain range. As long as I have them, I'm never truly free. Can they be removed? Theoretically, the procedure would be complex, dangerous, possibly fatal. But possible, perhaps. She looked at her hands, turning them over in the dim light. Your turn. Last question before we should rest. Darian thought about it. There were 1,000 things he could ask. About the war, about her enhancements, about what she planned to do if they survived. Instead, he asked, what would you want to do if you could choose anything? If none of this, the war, the council, the hunting, if none of it mattered, what would you want? She looked surprised by the question. Maybe nobody had ever asked her that before. Maybe she'd never asked herself. I'd like to see those ice glaciers, she said finally, on Titan, the ones that Diplomat mentioned to his daughter. I'd like to understand what makes them worth promising to see. Yeah, Darian said, feeling something tight in his chest. Yeah, I think I'd like that too. The storm raged on. They sat in silence, two refugees from a war that would continue without them, and rested while they could. The dawn came with silence, which was somehow worse than the storm. Darian woke to find Sarilith standing at the temple entrance, backlit by pale orange light, her posture rigid in a way that made his combat instincts scream warnings before his brain fully engaged. They're here, she said quietly. He was on his feet faster than his body appreciated, the dead exosuit making him stumble. How many? 3. Resonant class like me. They'll have received my neural signature an hour ago when the storm interference cleared. Her hand moved to her side. The wound was sealed now, the enhanced healing having done its work overnight. You should go. North, like I said. They're only here for me. Yeah, that's not happening. Darian checked his sidearm. Half a magazine. Fantastic. Got a plan? Don't die immediately? I like the optimism. Very inspiring leadership. He moved to the entrance, staying in shadow, and spotted them. 3 figures moving across the wasteland with inhuman grace, spread in a tactical formation that would make surrounding the temple efficient. They wore armor that seemed to drink the light, and even at this distance, he could tell they moved wrong. Too smooth, too fast, bodies that had been redesigned for violence. The one on the left is Kale, Sarilith said, her voice carrying an odd note. We were activated in the same batch. The council called us siblings, though we share no genetic material. He was always the most efficient. Efficient. That's a terrifying way to describe someone. He's killed 47 targets without a single failure. He won't understand why I stopped, won't understand doubt or hesitation or the value of individual lives. She pulled a piece of broken stone from the wall, tested its weight. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The other 2 are newer models, more refined, fewer ethical subroutines that might malfunction. Is that what the council thinks happened to you? An ethical malfunction? That's precisely what they think. Darian looked at the approaching resonance, then at Sarilith, then at the ancient temple around them. This building has been standing for thousands of years. It survived whatever killed the civilization that built it. Think it can handle some collateral damage? Her eyes met his, violet and reflective in the dawn light. What are you thinking? I'm thinking the architecture here is weird. Lots of passages, lots of angles, lots of ways to make 3 enhanced super soldiers very confused about where we are. He grinned, feeling the familiar buzz of adrenaline cutting through exhaustion. Plus, I'm betting they're used to targets who run or fight predictably. How often do people try to drop ancient alien structures on their heads? That seems like a terrible plan. You got a better one? She considered for a moment, then that almost laugh sound escaped. Not even slightly. They moved fast, deeper into the temple, away from the entrance. The passages were narrow here, forcing single-file movement, and the ceiling was supported by pillars that looked decorative, but were probably load-bearing. Probably. Darian wasn't an engineer, but he'd blown up enough buildings to have a working theory about structural integrity. They're inside, Sarilith said, her head tilted to sense electromagnetic signatures. Kale is broadcasting on our old tactical frequency. He's asking me to stop making this difficult. Tell him we're busy redecorating and he should come back later. I don't think humor will be effective in this situation. Humor is always effective. It's basically my only strategy at this point. He planted a breaching charge, his last one, on a pillar, set the timer for remote detonation. Keep moving. Make them follow us deep. They went down, which felt counterintuitive, but meant the resonance had to commit to the descent. The passages got narrower, older, the walls covered in those spiraling symbols that seemed to move in peripheral vision. Twice Siralith stopped them, sensing the hunters getting close, and they'd slip into alcoves or behind fallen debris. This is absurd, she whispered during one pause, pressed against him in a space barely large enough for two people. We're playing hide and seek with engineered killers in an archaeological site. Yeah, well, my career has been full of questionable decisions. This is just another one for the highlight reel. A sound behind them, footsteps that were too quiet, too precise. One of the new models moving through the passage with predatory confidence. Darian held his breath, felt Siralith tense beside him. The resonant passed within a meter of their hiding spot, head turning in smooth arcs as it scanned for thermal signatures. When it moved past, Siralith grabbed a loose stone and threw it down the passage ahead. The resonance spun toward the sound, and Darian triggered the breaching charge 2 levels up. The explosion was muffled by distance, but the effect was immediate. The temple groaned like a wounded animal, and dust poured from the ceiling. Somewhere above, stone met stone with grinding finality. The passage they'd just descended was now blocked by several tons of ancient architecture. "One down," Darian said. "2 to go." "You're insane. I prefer creatively desperate. Sounds better in reports?" They kept moving, and the game continued. Hunters and hunted trading places. The temple becoming a maze where enhanced reflexes mattered less than knowing the terrain. Siralith's ability to sense electromagnetic fields became their edge, letting them avoid the resonance scanning equipment while setting traps with Darian's remaining explosives and creative structural failures. The second resonant went down when Siralith led it into a chamber with a floor that wasn't as stable as it looked. The drop wasn't fatal. These things were too enhanced for that. But it bought them time, which left Kale. They found him, or he found them, in what might have been the temple's central chamber. A vast space with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness and walls covered in geometric patterns that seemed to pulse in the dim light. He stood in the center, perfectly still, his armor reflecting nothing. "Siralith," he said, and his voice was measured, calm, without inflection. "This is inefficient behavior. I know. You've compromised your mission parameters, endangered council objectives, displayed malfunction indicators." He took a step forward. "I'm authorized to retrieve you for reconditioning or terminate if retrieval is impossible." "I know that too. Then why resist?" "We're tools, Siralith. Tools don't choose their purpose." She stood straighter, and Darian saw something change in her posture, a decision crystallizing. "That's where you're wrong. We can choose. I choose." Kyle moved, faster than human, faster than thought, but Siralith had anticipated it. They collided in the center of the chamber, enhanced against enhanced, and Darian suddenly understood how outmatched he was. They moved like lightning given form, strikes and counters happening too fast to follow. He couldn't help there, but he could help with the environment. The pillars in this chamber were massive, and he'd been eyeing them since they'd entered. The way they connected to the ceiling, the stress patterns in the stone. He moved along the wall, staying out of the fight, and planted his last charges. Not on the pillars themselves, that wouldn't work, but on the keystones where pillar met ceiling. Siralith and Kyle fought with the kind of violence that transcended technique. It was pure efficiency, two weapons designed for the same purpose now turned against each other. Siralith was slower, the wound, the exhaustion, but she fought with something Kale didn't have: desperation, the knowledge that losing meant more than mission failure. She went down hard, Kale's strike catching her across the temple. Darian saw her fall, saw Kale move to finish it, and triggered every charge at once. The ceiling didn't collapse. The ancient builders had done their work too well, but pieces fell, massive chunks of carved stone that crashed down with enough force to crack the floor. Kyle had to abandon his attack to avoid being crushed, his enhanced reflexes barely enough to dodge falling architecture. In that moment, Saralith moved, not toward safety, toward Kyle. Her hand went to her head, to where Darian knew the neural implants were, and she did something, pressed something, twisted something, and screamed. Kyle stumbled, hands going to his own head. The neural link. She was overloading it, feeding noise into the connection that all resonance shared. "Go!" Saralith shouted at Darian. "Now!" He grabbed her instead, hauling her toward the passage they'd entered through. She was dead weight for a moment, whatever she'd done to the neural link costing her coordination. But then her feet found purchase, and they were running. Behind them, Cal recovered, shouted something, gave chase. They made it to the temple entrance as the sun climbed higher, turning the sky from orange to yellow. The wasteland stretched out like a promise. They ran, stumbled, really, both of them damaged and exhausted, and the temple's shadow stretched before them. "The implants," Saralith gasped as they ran. "I burned them out, all of them. They can't track me anymore. They can't—" She stumbled, and Darian caught her. "But it means I can't sense them either. Can't coordinate my enhancements properly. I've made myself half blind." "Good," Darian said. "Being blind is better than being controlled." They crested a dune and saw it. A human patrol, 2 kilometers out. Darian triggered his emergency beacon, the one thing in his armor that still worked, and prayed they'd see it before Kale caught up. The patrol changed course, started toward them. Saralith slumped against him, exhausted. This was a terrible plan. Yeah, but it worked. Mostly. We're like 60% still alive, which is better than I expected. Your standards are remarkably low. Military training, we learned to celebrate small victories, like not being completely dead. The patrol reached them before Kale did. Soldiers surrounded them, weapons trained, shouting questions Darian didn't have energy to answer properly. He just held up his ID chip and said, "Commander Darian Cross, I need medical evac and someone who can authorize asylum for a defector." They stared at Saralith, at her pointed ears, her alien features, the ruined neural implants leaking blood down the side of her face. "Sir," one soldier said carefully, "that's an ascendancy soldier." "Yeah, she's also the reason I'm alive. So how about we skip the part where everyone points guns and jump to the part where someone with more authority than me makes actual decisions?" He was swaying now, exhaustion finally winning. "Also, does anyone have water and maybe food that doesn't taste like recycled despair?" Later, much later, after medical checks and debriefings and about 40 meetings with officers who had opinions, they sat in a transit station on the edge of human space. Saralith wore civilian clothes that didn't quite fit, her hair pulled back to show those pointed ears. The asylum request was still processing. Everything was still uncertain, but they were alive. They were free. "So," Darian said, pulling up a navigation chart on his datapad. "Titan, ice glaciers. I checked the civilian transport schedules. There's a tour that runs every 3 months. Saralith looked at him, surprise flickering across features he'd learned to read. "You're serious? Someone once told me those glaciers are worth seeing. Figure I should find out if they were right." He grinned. "Plus, I'm technically on medical leave for the next 6 months, while they decide what to do with the soldier who gave medical aid to an enemy assassin and then blew up an archaeological site. Might as well spend it doing something interesting." "That's not a plan. You got a better one?" She was quiet for a moment, then that almost laugh sound escaped. But this time it turned into an actual laugh, genuine and surprised. "Not even slightly." They sat together in the transit station, watching ships come and go, and planned a trip to see ice glaciers on Titan. 2 soldiers who'd stopped being weapons and weren't quite sure what they were becoming instead. But they had time to figure it out.